Hey everyone, today we're going to explore a lesser known but super interesting part of history, the kingdom of the Suebi. Now, this wasn't just any old kingdom, it was one of the very first to break away from the mighty Roman Empire. Imagine that! At a time when Rome ruled almost everything, this group of people, the Suebi, decided to carve out their own piece of the world. So, who were the Suebi? Well, they were a Germanic tribe that, around 409 AD, settled in the areas that are today's northern Portugal and Gallaecia in Spain. They set up shop in what used to be Roman provinces, and over time, their little slice of land became known as the Kingdom of Gallaecia. For nearly 2 centuries, they managed to keep their independence until 585 AD, when they were eventually absorbed by the Visigothic Kingdom. Now, let's rewind a bit to where it all started. The Suebi are believed to have crossed the Rhine River on New Year's Eve in 406 AD. They weren't alone. Other tribes like the Vandals and Uhlans were also on the move. These tribes were likely pushed westward by the terrifying Huns, who were sweeping across Europe at the time. The Suebi, along with their allies, took advantage of the chaos within the Roman Empire, which was already struggling with invasions and internal conflicts. By 409 AD, they made their way to the Iberian Peninsula, which is modern-day Spain and Portugal. They crossed the Pyrenees, the mountain range separating France and Spain, and once they got through, they went on a bit of a rampage. The Roman soldiers were in such disarray that they couldn't really stop them. The Suebi, along with the Vandals and Uhlans, plundered their way through the land, causing such a famine that, according to one historian, people were driven to cannibalism. Yeah, things got that bad. But eventually, they calmed down and divided up the land among themselves. The Suebi settled in the northwest, around the area that would become Gallaecia, and soon enough, they started to integrate with the locals. Unlike what you might expect, this wasn't all about fighting and chaos. The Suebi actually settled down, turned their swords into plows, and started farming the land. It wasn't all peaceful, but they managed to coexist with the local population without too much trouble, at least for a while. And in the early 400s AD, and the Suebi have settled in what's now Gallaecia in northern Spain. Things are heating up because the Roman Empire, which had been the big boss in the region for centuries, is crumbling. In 416 AD, the Visigoths, another powerful group, were sent into the Iberian Peninsula by the Western Roman Emperor to deal with these so-called barbarians who had started arriving in 409 AD. By 418, the Visigoths, led by King Gallaecia, had wiped out some of the other barbarian groups, like the Sealing Vandals and the Uhlans. But interestingly, they left the Suebi pretty much untouched. This left the Suebi and the Hasding Vandals as the last 2 standing forces in the peninsula. Fast forward a bit to 419 AD. The Visigoths had now moved on to their new territories in Aquitania, now modern-day southwestern France, and a conflict broke out between the Vandals, led by Gunderic, and the Suebi, under King Hermeric. The 2 sides clashed at the Battle of the Nerbaceus Mountains, but before things got too out of hand, the Romans stepped in. The Comes Hispaniarum Asterius led Roman forces that attacked the Vandals, forcing them to retreat to Baetica, what we now call Andalusia. With the Vandals out of the way, the Suebi were left with almost complete control over the province. By 429 AD, the Vandals were getting ready to head out to Africa. A Suebi warlord named Ariamir decided this was the perfect time to try and plunder Lusitania, a region to the south. But he ran into the new Vandal king, Gallaecia, who wasn't having any of it. Ariamir tried to retreat but drowned in the Guadiana River, a dramatic end to the first major Suebi military action outside their home turf in Gallaecia. With the Vandals gone, the Suebi were now the last barbarian power left in Hispania. King Hermeric, the Suebi leader, spent the rest of his reign strengthening their control over Gallaecia. In 430 AD, he broke a long-standing peace with the locals and began sacking central Gallaecia. But these weren't just passive villagers. They fought back. forcing Hermeric to make peace again, swapping prisoners to seal the deal. However, things didn't stay calm for long. Hostilities flared up again in 431 and 433. This time Hermeric sent the local bishop, Symphosius, as an ambassador, the first real sign of cooperation between the Suebi and the local population. Finally, by 438 AD, they managed to hammer out a lasting peace that would hold for about 20 years. Now, in 438 AD, King Hermeric was getting on in years and wasn't feeling too well. Having already secured Gallaecia, he decided it was time to pass the torch to his son, Richila. And let me tell you, Richila was a chip off the old block but with some big ambitions. He wasted no time in expanding the kingdom. That same year, he launched a campaign into Boeotia, where he handed the Roman forces a solid defeat near the Genal River, even capturing a hefty treasure in the process. In 439 AD, Richila moved into Lusitania and took its capital, Merida, making it the new capital of the Suevic Kingdom for a while. He didn't stop there. By 440 AD, he'd besieged and forced the surrender of a Roman official, Count Censorius, in the strategically important city of Mertula. The following year, in 441 AD, Richila's forces conquered Seville, the capital of Boeotia. With this victory, the Suebi controlled not just Gallaecia but also Boeotia and parts of Carthaginensis, at least for a time. There's some debate though about how deep their control really went in these areas. It might have been more about raiding than ruling. By 446 AD, the Romans decided enough was enough and sent a large force, including a bunch of Goths, to try and take back their provinces. But Richila was ready. He met the Romans head-on, defeated the Goths, and sent the Roman commander Vitus running back in disgrace. After that, the Romans pretty much gave up on trying to retake Hispania. In 448 AD, after a long and successful reign, Richila passed away. Interestingly, he remained a pagan to the end, despite his son Ricaire, who took over, being a Catholic Christian. Ricaire is actually one of the first Catholic Christian kings among the Germanic peoples, which was a pretty big deal at the time. He even started minting coins in his own name, something that was seen as a clear sign of Suebi autonomy. So, Ricaire, eager to follow in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, made some bold moves. He married the daughter of the Gothic king Theodoric I in 448 AD, which helped strengthen ties between the Suebi and the Visigoths. He also led several successful raids into Vasconia, Saragossa, and Jeddah in northeastern Spain, sometimes teaming up with local insurgents. In Jeddah, he even captured some prisoners who were taken back to Suebi lands as serfs. But as the Suebi kept pushing their luck, plundering lands that had been returned to Rome, the Emperor Avitus finally had enough. In 456 AD, he sent the Visigoth king Theodoric II with a massive army into Gallaecia. The Suebi put up a fight, but on October 5th, by the river Orbigo near Astorga, they were defeated. Ricaire tried to flee but was captured and executed. The Visigoths spent the next few months crushing what was left of Suebi resistance before heading back to Gaul, leaving the Suebi kingdom in chaos. After Ricaire's death, the Suebi were leaderless and divided. A guy named Eolf, who might have been a Goth or a Warni, tried to take control but was killed in Porto in 457 AD. Then, the Suebi themselves chose a new king, Maldres, but this led to a split among them, with some backing another leader named Framta. It was a messy time, with the Suebi fighting among themselves and against the Romans and Goths. Eventually, in 464 AD, a man named Remismund managed to unite the Suebi factions and restore some order. He even got the backing of the Visigoths, who sent him gifts and a wife as a sign of approval. Under Remismund, the Suebi went back to their old ways, raiding nearby lands, including Lusitania and the Conventus Asterisans. They even destroyed part of the walls of Canimbriga in Lusitania, forcing its inhabitants to flee. In 468 AD, they captured Lisbon, which became a key city for the Suebi. And now let's dive into what happened during the Arian period of the Suevic Kingdom, a time that's pretty murky in terms of historical records. There isn't much detailed information about this period from 470 to 550, but we do know from Isidore of Seville, a historian writing in the 7th century, that there were several kings ruling during this time, and all of them were Arians. Now, there's this medieval document called Divisio Wambi that mentions a king named Theodemar, but beyond that, he's pretty much a mystery. Some other, less reliable sources from much later mention kings with names like Hermaneric II, Richila II, and Ricaire II, but these accounts are not considered trustworthy. One piece of evidence we do have from this period is a stone inscription found in Verão, Portugal. It talks about the foundation of a church by a Benedictine nun in 555, under the rule of someone referred to as the Most Serene King Veramand. There's some debate over whether this Veramand was a Suevic king or if the inscription actually refers to King Bermudo II of Leon, who lived much later. So, the exact identity of Veramand remains uncertain. We also know from a letter sent by Pope Vigilius to the Bishop of Braga around 540 that a number of Catholics had converted to Arianism during this time. Some Catholic churches were even demolished, though the exact details are unclear. Now let's talk about the conversion of the Suevi from Arianism to Catholic Orthodoxy, which is where things get a bit more complicated. Different sources tell the story in various ways. The minutes of the First Council of Braga, which took place on May 1, 561, mention that this synod was held at the orders of a king named Ariamir. Ariamir was clearly an Orthodox Christian, but whether he was the first Orthodox monarch since Ricaire is up for debate. He was, however, the first to allow an Orthodox synod to take place. On the other hand, Isidore of Seville's Historia Suevorum credits a king named Theodemar with converting the Suevi from Arianism, with help from a missionary named Martin of Braga. Then there's the Frankish historian Gregory of Tours, who tells the story of a king named Careric, who promised to convert to Catholicism if his son, who was suffering from leprosy, was cured. Through the intercession of Saint Martin of Tours, the son was healed, and Careric, along with his entire household, converted. So, scholars have tried to piece these different stories together. Some suggest that Careric and Theodemar may have been successors to Ariamir, meaning Isidore might have gotten the timeline wrong. Others think Careric and Theodemar could be the same person, with Theodemar being the name Careric took upon baptism. There's also a theory that Ariamir, Theodemar, and Careric might have been related, possibly even the same person with different names recorded by different sources. Another theory, proposed by some historians, is that Careric might not have existed at all, and was simply a mistake made by Gregory of Tours. If Martin of Braga, who is associated with converting the Suevi, died around 580 and had been a bishop for about 30 years, then Careric's conversion must have happened by around 550 at the latest. Lastly, some scholars believe the Suevic conversion was a gradual process. They suggest that Careric's public conversion was the first step, followed by the lifting of a ban on Orthodox synods during Ariamir's reign. Theodemar, in turn, might have been responsible for initiating a persecution of Arians in an effort to root out their heresy from the kingdom. To complicate things further, there's a chronicler named John of Biclarum who claims that the Suevi's conversion to Catholicism happened alongside the Goths under record around 587 to 589. This aligns more with the period when the Suevic Kingdom was being absorbed into the Visigothic Kingdom, so it could reflect a later interpretation of events. And now let's move into the 6th century, a period marked by significant changes and challenges for the Suevic Kingdom. First off, let's talk about the Britons. Sometime around the late 5th or early 6th century, a group of Romano-Britons fleeing the Anglo-Saxon invasion made their way to the northern part of the Suevic Kingdom of Gallaecia. They settled in a region that later became known as Britonia. Most of what we know about these settlers comes from church records. For instance, the Second Council of Braga in 572 mentions a diocese called the Britonensis Ecclesia or British Church, and an episcopal seat referred to as the Sedis Britonarum or See of the Britons. There's also mention of a monastery called Maximi, likely the monastery of Santa Maria de Britonia. The bishop who represented this diocese at the council had a distinctly British name, Maloc. This see remained active, with its bishops participating in various councils throughout the 7th century. Now, turning to the Suevic kings, King Ariamir takes the stage in 561. He was in his 3rd year of reign when he called the First Council of Braga on May 1, 561. Ariamir is referred to as the most glorious king in the council records. This council was significant as it was the first Orthodox council held in the Suevic Kingdom, but interestingly, it focused almost entirely on condemning Priscillianism rather than Arianism. The council did, however, take a stand against some pagan customs like certain hairstyles and clothing styles, which were declared inappropriate for clergy. A few years later, in 569, Ariamir's successor, Theodemar, held another council in Lugo. This council was more about organizing the kingdom's ecclesiastical structure. At Theodemar's request, the kingdom was divided into 2 provinces, each with its own metropolitan, one based in Braga and the other in Lugo. Theodemar's reforms also included establishing or reorganizing 13 episcopal sees, splitting them between the northern and southern regions of the kingdom. When Theodemar passed away, Miro succeeded him as king in 570. Miro's reign was challenging as the Visigoths, under King Liuvigild, were aggressively reasserting their power. In 572, Miro called the Second Council of Braga, presided over by Saint Martin of Braga, a key figure in the Suevic conversion to Catholicism. This council emphasized the unity and purity of the Catholic faith in Gallaecia, and for the first time openly criticized Arianism. Notably, among the bishops who assisted at this council, 5 were Suevic and 1 was a Briton, showing a blend of cultures within the kingdom. In the same year, Miro led a military campaign against the Runcones while Liuvigild was expanding his influence in the south. However, by 576, Liuvigild's campaigns were edging closer to Suevic territory. Miro managed to negotiate a temporary peace with Liuvigild, but the threat from the Visigoths was far from over. Around this time, Miro also sent envoys to the Frankish king Guntram, seeking alliances, but these attempts were thwarted by Chilperigot, who captured and imprisoned the envoys for a year. By 579, tensions within the Visigothic kingdom escalated when Liuvigild's son, Hermenegild, rebelled against his father after converting to Catholicism. Miro, seeing an opportunity, marched south with his army to support Hermenegild, but found himself besieged by Liuvigild. Miro was forced to sign a treaty of loyalty to the Visigothic king. After this, Miro returned to Gallaecia, but fell ill and died shortly after. Miro's death in 584 marked the beginning of the end for the Suevic kingdom. His son, Eburic, briefly took the throne but was soon overthrown by his brother-in-law Odoacer, who forced Eburic into a monastery. Odoacer's usurpation gave Liuvigild the pretext he needed to invade. In 585, Liuvigild launched a full-scale invasion of Gallaecia, crushing the Suevic kingdom and annexing it into the Visigothic realm. The Sueves' treasure and lands were seized, and the kingdom was reduced to a province of the Visigoths. Liuvigild attempted to reintroduce the Arian church among the Sueves, but this was short-lived. His son, Record, succeeded him in 586 and quickly moved to convert both Visigoths and Sueves to Catholicism. This conversion was solidified at the Third Council of Toledo, where several Suevic bishops renounced Arianism. Following the annexation, the administrative structure of the Suevic kingdom was initially kept intact. However, by the mid-7th century, reforms led to the disappearance of most of the Suevic administrative divisions, except for key cities like Braga, Lugo, and Tui. Over time, the Sueves were assimilated, and their identity as a separate people gradually faded, with the last mention of them appearing in a 10th century document,